Thank you so much, friends. Good evening. Are you hearing me okay? Does it sound good? Yes, okay. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to St. Paul's for this invitation. I'd like to thank your pastors, Dan and Paul. I'd like to thank the Faith Formation Committee for this invitation, and most especially Bethany, Marcia, and Audrey, along with my sister, Kate Parker-Burgard and Don Parker-Burgard. They were the ones who really got the word out about this. They homemade all these wonderful refreshments and are really extending the wonderful hospitality of this church to all of us. So thank you so much to you. And thank you also to each and every one of you for being here this evening. There are a lot of things you could be doing right now with your time, and I'm really honored by your attention. I hope that when you leave this evening, you'll feel like you learned a few interesting things and your evening has been worthwhile. So here we go. Just a little bit of an overview. First, I'm going to speak about the relationship between feminism and the Bible. And then I'm going to turn this to my most recent book, as you heard, Eve Isn't Evil, and show how I hope to contribute to this conversation. I'm going to briefly introduce you to some chapters in the book with pictures. Some of you have read the book or parts of it, and you'll be able to see the people whom you've read about. We'll have a time of questions, answers, and discussion. We'll have a raffle for one free copy of the book, so I hope everybody has a ticket, and if you don't, please raise your hand. Kate or Don will bring you one. And then I'll end with some concluding thoughts. There are books available after that for purchase and signing, and I hope you'll stay and mingle and have some refreshments. So let's talk a little bit about the relationship between feminism and the Bible. I will tell you that I put the word feminist in the title of this book, in the subtitle, with a bit of trepidation. It is a loaded term for many people, and for many people it has very negative connotations, but not for me. And so I was very clear to define feminism in the book, and this is just how I define it. Liberty and justice for all, including people who identify as female. It seems it's hard to argue with that. And I'd just like to tell you about the impact that feminism has had on my own life. Like many of you, I imagine, I grew up in the latter part of the 20th century. And here's a picture of my family. So this is me. Oh, the pointer isn't working here. This is me. And this is Kate, who's back there, and this is my sister Valerie, who's right there when she was a little baby, okay? And this is our mom. Our mom I shouldn't say just, after she graduated from high school, she went to secretarial school. That was very common for women who came of age when she did. Her mother, whom you see here, our grandmother, Elida Woodenberg, she just went to school through 8th grade, and then she started working as a bookkeeper. My mother's father, Jim Graham here, he was one of 14 children. If you count, you'll only see 11 there. That's because 3 of them didn't make it to adulthood. They had no birth control, and they did not have a lot of money, and the mother kept on having child after child. That's my mother's side of the family, our mother's side of the family. My father has a master's degree. He was a Methodist minister. And here are his parents. This is my grandmother, our grandmother, whom we never got to meet, Eleanor Louisa LaCour Parker, because she died when my father was 26. But she graduated from Vassar in the class of 1911, and she taught Latin and Greek. At the beginning of the 20th century, only 9% of the population finished 12th grade. More people were like my maternal grandparents who just went to school through 8th grade, then started working. And this is her husband, Jim, who also was a teacher of ancient languages. That I could become a professor and teach ancient languages and be a mother who has 2 children and have access to all those levels of education just 2 short generations later from my maternal grandmother, these are gains that feminists fought for and earned that are directly manifest in my life. And I share that with you because I'd like you to think about some of the ways your life has changed as well due to feminism. Maybe you've seen this bumper sticker. I know we've got educators here. If you can read this, thank a teacher. Have you seen this bumper sticker before? Yes, okay. So I'd like to say mutatis mutandis, with necessary changes being made. If you can be sexually active, but decide when and how many children to have, thank a feminist. Margaret Sanger was a nurse who promoted family planning, and she was arrested for opening a clinic that provided birth control. If you are a woman who has greater access to education than previous generations in your family, thank a feminist. Most colleges and universities were closed to women, some until relatively recently. The first woman graduate of a four-year institution was Catherine Elizabeth Brewer Benson, who graduated from Wesleyan in 1840. If you are a girl who played sports in high school, which they barely had when I was in high school because it was before Title IX, thank a feminist. And if you have recourse, if you are sexually harassed, thank a feminist. This is also part of Title IX. Legislation was passed forbidding discrimination on the basis of gender in 1972. So thanks to feminists, many of us have more opportunities and rights. But we need to be aware that we still have a long way to go. In terms of economic justice, women still earn 82 cents to every dollar that a man earns, and it's even lower for Black and Hispanic women. Black women earn 58% of what white men earn, and Hispanic women earn 54% of what white non-Hispanic men earn. We also need to be concerned about violence against women. Globally, 1 in 3 women are subject to physical or sexual violence. But even for women who are privileged, there are more subtle manifestations of sexism in our culture. For example, a lot of burdens are frequently placed on women that are not placed on men. Women are often expected silently to do a second shift of work. After they work outside the home, they come back and do a lot of the work, a disproportionate amount of the work, inside the home. They're expected to do it all, paid labor outside the house and unpaid labor inside the house. This is the invisible labor often fulfilled by women. Cooking, shopping, cleaning, arranging doctor's appointments, social things, all of this takes time, energy, effort, and this is often placed on women. And this has given rise to books such as these, The Second Shift, Working Families and the Revolution at Home, and also Why We Can't Sleep, about women in midlife and all that is expected of women. But I want to point out that this whole sexist system is also hard on men. Men have a lot of pressure to become wage earners and sometimes don't have the same choices that women do. And also, non-binary people feel like they are totally left out of this system or ostracized within it. Patriarchy sets up a lot of people to lose, except those at the very top who made the rules and set up a system that silently and effectively keeps them in place. Anyone can be a feminist if you support the rights of women, but there are risks because patriarchy rewards those who support its values. And writing off feminists as radical haters is one very effective way to seek to disempower them. I suggest to you that the only people whom feminism is against is those who try to exploit or control others. And maybe they deserve a little pushback. But let's take a look at this and equate it with the Bible. So I'm going to ask periodically if I can have volunteers to read these slides. If you'd be willing to do that, that would be so wonderful. So the Bible has been used throughout history, throughout Western history, as a weapon to disempower women and deny their full humanity, and to assert that women are inferior to men and that such a placement is ordained by God. And this tradition of this sexist interpretation goes back thousands of years, even to the Bible itself. The Bible has been and still is used as a weapon against women. Can I ask for a volunteer to read this slide for us, please? This passage from 2 Timothy, 1 Timothy 2. Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. Timothy 2:11, let a woman learn in silence with full submission. Timothy 2:12.
Thanks. Just skip the verse numbers if you would, please. Thank you so much. Just read the text. Thank you so much.
I permit no woman to teach or to have authority over a man. She is to be kept silent. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor.
Thank you.
Yet she will be saved through childbearing, provided they continue in faith and love and holiness with modesty.
Okay, thank you so much. What's your name? Thank you, Bridget. Thank you very much. So this is in the Bible, right? This is in the New Testament. This is one of the pastoral epistles. And so here you see the text interpreting itself. It's interpreting Genesis, what has come previously. And this is enshrined in our canon. People can read this in church and say, the word of the Lord, thanks be to God. You know, we have our work cut out for us, friends. And this is not just from long ago and far away. Look at this article from the New York Times in 2023. Southern Baptists vote to further expand restrictions on women as leaders. And of course, the Bible is used as a justification for such views. I'd like to look at the different waves of feminism now and how they have addressed the use of the Bible. So the first wave of feminism began in the 19th century with women fighting for the right to vote and access to education. Clergymen used the Bible at this convention, Syracuse in 1852, they used the Bible to declare women as inferior. And at this third National Women's Rights Convention, a woman delegate proposed a resolution saying that the Bible recognized women's equality with men. And when she proposed this, clergymen who were there got up and they read these verses. So we're going to do a little reenactment. Can I ask for a man to stand up and read this, please? A brave man. You're just acting, would you? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
To the woman he said, I will greatly increase your pains in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children, yet your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you.
Okay, good. Thank you so very much. What's your name? Your name? I'm sorry?
Jim.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much. So here, your desire shall be for your husband, he shall rule over you. Genesis 3:16. Another man, please, to stand up and read this verse. Thank you. And you're next. Go ahead, please.
Wives, be subject to your husbands as you are to the Lord.
Beautiful. Thank you. What's your name? Thank you, Matt. And?
1 Timothy, I permit no woman to teach or to have authority over a man. She is to keep silent.
Beautiful. Thank you. What's your name? James. Thank you, James. Okay, so this is what the man got up to say. Okay, now I need a woman to stand up and read this verse for us, please. Okay, Val. Thank you.
So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them.
Okay, male and female, equaling God's image. Thanks, Val. Can I have another volunteer, please? Thank you.
Then afterward, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy.
Beautiful. Thank you. What's your name?
Ellie.
Thank you, Ellie. So here we have this, your sons and your daughters will prophesy from the book of Joel. And finally, one last woman to stand up and read it for us. Nancy, how about it?
There is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male and female, for all of you are one in Christ Jesus.
Okay, thanks very much. So we've just sort of done our own, thank you, Nancy. We've done our own little reenactment of what went on. The clergymen stood up and they offered these verses that put women down, and then when women stood up and they offered these verses that extolled women's power, or at least equality. So we all can play that game, right? You can justify anything you want with the Bible. It's a big book. It's really not a book, it's a library. The word book Bible comes from the Greek ta biblia. It means books. And the books of the Bible span about a little over 1,000 years of literature. And it's a library, 66 books in the Protestant canon. And like any good library, it's going to contain a wide diversity of opinion. And so you can justify anything you want. I saw a t-shirt not that long ago at a conference, and it said, "I can do all things through a Bible verse taken out of context." But the power is not in the text. The power is in the interpretation. What do you do with that text? And Elizabeth Cady Stanton realized this, and so she published the Woman's Bible in 1895. And in this, she interpreted biblical texts in favor of women, or at least not against them. But she did not have the tools of biblical scholarship. She didn't have the ancient languages of Hebrew and Greek, which really change how you understand the text. And women needed to acquire these tools so that biblical interpretation didn't just remain with those who wanted to put them down. You need to be able to play that, to know what's there in the original languages. And so in the second wave of feminism, this began in the 1960s and was tied to the women's liberation movement. And here, women sought increased rights, particularly around education, labor, sexual abuse, and choices available, reproductive choices. Women now in the biblical field had gained these tools of biblical scholarship, including biblical languages. And the first book in Hebrew Bible scholarship that really changed the field by introducing feminism was this one, God and the Rhetoric of Sexuality, published in 1978 by Dr. Phyllis Tribble. And Kate, Don, and I all studied with Dr. Phyllis Tribble at Union Theological Seminary. And she's still alive, she's in her 90s, and I've gotten to know her in recent years, and she told me not long ago that it was because a woman who was a feminist theologian named Mary Daly said to her, "You can't be a feminist and love the Bible." And she thought, but I am a feminist, and I do love the Bible. There's got to be another way. And so she looked at the text in its original Hebrew, and she discovered that so much of what we've been told about different women, in particular about Eve, actually isn't even in the text. And so she used the tools of rhetorical criticism, closely analyzing the words, to get back to its original meanings or possibilities, certainly, and see what was there regarding women. And her interpretation of the story of Adam and Eve has had great influence. But I'll share with you, it's been a little bit disheartening to me as a seminary professor, because I would assign this one chapter from her book on Eve, called A Love Story Gone Awry, and my students would say, wow, this is so radical. And I'd think, it came out in 1978. You know? So we're still trying to get that word out there. So she was really the foremother of feminist biblical interpretation in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, Dr. Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza taught at Harvard for many years, and she wrote this book called In Memory of Her that came out in 1983. And in this, she talks about the Jesus community as radically egalitarian. And she focuses on how Jesus treated women with great respect. So the first wave of feminist biblical interpretation where scholars, I shouldn't say wave, but the first real deep scholarship that was done by women who were scholars themselves, at first was a rescue and recovery mission. Where are the women in the Bible? Where can we find them? What can we learn about them? And how can we use tools of biblical scholarship to offer empowering interpretations as opposed to interpretations that beat women down? So our third wave of feminism arose in the 1990s in response to the second wave and took questions deeper, in particular regarding racial justice and questions of gender. There was awareness of the need to be recognized politically, that women were often dismissed or discounted, especially regarding sexual rights and abuse. Around this time in 1990, Judith Butler published a very influential book called Gender Trouble. And in this, she suggests that more than biology, gender is a performance. I mean, think about all the things that you did today to signal to the world your gender identity. It's a performance that we choose to maintain in the ways that society expects of us or not. And so there was this awareness of how gender is a construct, and there was also more racial awareness in biblical scholarship, that women have different experiences. And some books that came out at this time were the Women's Bible Commentary, which actually was specifically designed to take off of Elizabeth Cady Stanton's volume, but this time with biblical scholars contributing all the chapters. And then Just a Sister Away by Renita Weems introduced womanist scholarship, which looks at the text from the perspective of Black women. And then Women in Scripture is a dictionary of all the women in the Bible, named and unnamed. But what happened now, the addition of this phase, was people began to wonder, why are women constructed in the text the way they are? So it's an effort in deconstruction. Beyond who are the women in the text, what can we learn about them, but why are they written the way they are? For example, in Genesis chapter 30, verse 1, Rachel, who is one of the wives of Jacob, who becomes Israel, she says, "Give me children or I shall die." And there's this great yearning for sons in the Bible. And feminist scholars started to say, is this really what women who lived 2,000 years ago wanted more than anything else? Or is this the concern of the elite male writers who are paying attention to their own legacies? We don't know. We can't know, but even asking the questions opens up different possibilities. And so now feminists would read the Bible and say, whose interests are served in this text and whose interests are served in this interpretation? And to be very aware of those power dynamics. Because women are shown often in the Bible as upholding men's roles. And we want to open our mind to different possibilities. So the fourth wave of feminism was in 2010 and onward. And here there was more questioning of gender norms, the recognition that women's experience is very different. I mean, to be a woman, that's not the sole marker of your identity. We all have various layers of our identity. And identity is really fluid. I mean, right now I'm a speaker, I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna be a wife, you know. I mean, it changes all the time depending on the circumstances that we're in. And there's this recognition of intersectionality. Kimberly Crenshaw is a scholar at Columbia who coined this term, and she just helped us to be aware of the many identities that we have that interact at the same time, and how different ones recede and come forward, and we can be doubly or triply oppressed, or doubly or triply privileged. And so we want to recognize these layers of identity in the text. How are the gender identities constructed? And we're going to take them into account as we read. And here are some books: Feminist Theory in the Bible by Esther Fuchs. Gail Yee edited this book on intersectionality, paying attention to these various identities. And then the Women's Lectionary for the Whole Church. This was done by an Episcopal priest named Will Gaffney, the Reverend Dr. Will Gaffney, whom you may know. And she wanted to put out a lectionary or church readings that really focused on women. So I'm going to pause there. If anybody has any thoughts or questions or comments, then I'm going to go on to the second part of my talk. Any thoughts? Yes, please, Audrey.
When the different books of the New Testament were written, from what I've studied, something was written quite late by various communities within the Christian church at the time, inserted some, spoke about things that were more their agenda, and not necessarily, maybe 100 or 200 years later after Christ.
Right.
So maybe a little agenda driven from those specific communities.
Oh, that is so true. So Audrey's talking about the different agenda of the Bible writers. They all have an agenda. People write people off, oh, she has an agenda. It's like, of course you have an agenda. Who doesn't have an agenda? It's just a question of whether or not you articulate it. I wrote this book, I've got a big agenda. That's why I bothered, But that's a really good point, Audrey, because we need to keep in mind, back in the ancient world, most people probably never, certainly in the time of the Hebrew Bible, most people probably never saw a written word and they didn't miss it at all. They just went about their lives. Formal education was very rare because it was expensive to be able, you got up every day and everybody tried to do one thing. Don't die, okay? That's your main goal. And so to be able to get the parchment, so these texts were written on animal skin, treated animal skin, parchment, and you write with natural dyes, gum, resin, charcoal, very expensive. Not to mention the time to learn the letters and to learn how to write. It's a lot of work. So the people who write these texts are of the elite. We need to keep that in mind. It's an important perspective that we often forget, but they do have agendas. Thank you, Audrey. Okay, I'm going to go now to the second part of my talk, which is to tell you a little bit about the contribution that I hope to make through this book, Eve Isn't Evil, to feminism and biblical studies. So the goals of the book are to intertwine academic knowledge about the Bible with personal stories. You've probably heard the feminist maxim, the personal is political, but I suggest to you the personal is also biblical. And so I seek to make biblical scholarship more accessible. There are a lot of conversations about the Bible that take place in the academy, and they stay there. For example, every Hebrew Bible scholar knows that there are lots of goddesses in the Bible. There are lots of goddesses in the Bible. And people in the pews are like, what? There are goddesses in the Bible? Like, yeah, one of them is named Asherah, and her name is there 40 times. But you've never heard of her because the translators render it as sacred pole. So they're worshiping a sacred pole, and you don't know it's named after the goddess Asherah. I mean, I just thought, people need to know this stuff. It's really interesting. And so I wanted to write a book that would take some of this knowledge that often stays in the academy and share it in a way that was accessible. And so to do that, I wrote in a very personal way. I write often in the first person, and I share some very personal stories. And the reason I do that is because sharing stories is a feminist act. There is power in sharing our stories. And the Me Too movement is a really good example of that. Because it used to be women just put up with sexual harassment. I mean, some of you, like me, have been around long enough to know how that was. And then when people started telling their stories, we don't so much anymore. And so I told some really pretty personal stories in this book. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of the contents, and then I'm going to just sort of do a little toe dip into a couple of the chapters. So in the introduction to the book, the first chapter in the beginning, I explain what I seek to do. And then in chapters 2 through 9, I go through the Bible, intertwining academic knowledge and personal stories. I do this in canonical order, so the order in which they appear in the text. And chapter 2, Eve Isn't Evil, is about why Eve is not only not bad, but I think absolutely fabulous, because she brings knowledge to humanity, so we're all very much in her debt. That's right. In chapter 3, it's You Think Your Family's a Mess, Biblical Families Are Us. I talk about the ancestor stories, which we read in Genesis 12 through 50. Chapter 4, Sex Workers, Slaughters, and Deities Without Borders. I talk about prostitutes in the Bible, various goddesses in the Bible, and how do we make sense of all the violence and killing that we read about. Prophet for Prophecy, I speak about the prophets that are all around us, how prophecy is not just something from biblical times long ago and far away, but I share stories about prophets whom I have known myself and how I've recognized them. In the chapter, The Job of Job, I talk about all the loss that Job experiences. In Guns and Psalms, I talk about the heartfelt emotion of the Psalms. Song of Songs and Sing Sing is about teaching the Bible inside Sing Sing maximum security prison. And then my favorite feminist well, just stop here. So those chapters 2 through 8 are all based on the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. And there are two reasons I do this. First, it's my area of expertise, so I've got more to say. But second, these Hebrew scriptures, the first part of the Bible, these are Jesus' scriptures. Jesus was a good Jew. These are the texts that are foundational to his theological formation. And so many Christians really don't know about them. In church, we tend to gravitate towards the Gospels and the stories of Jesus. And I understand that. But know where Jesus is getting his theological ideas. It's from the Hebrew scriptures. And then this one chapter, chapter 9, is on the New Testament, because I couldn't leave the New Testament altogether. And that chapter is my favorite feminist Jew. And who's that? Jesus, that's right. Jesus, thank you, Jen. Jesus is indeed my favorite feminist Jew. At the end of each chapter, there are discussion questions, and they're explicitly focused on building community. It's not about translation or academic things, but they're questions to get people sharing their own stories. So that it can be easily used in a Bible study, in a book group, in conversation with a partner or a friend, reflection in a journal. And I will mention now, just if anyone's interested, I do have a free study guide at my website, juliefaithparker.com, very on brand. But if you go there, you can just download it for free. It's in Word, and you can adapt it. It's got opening prayers, more questions, optional Bible studies, closing prayers, whatever you might want to use. So I just put that out there. It's there. It's free. Should that be of interest to you for a book group or for a congregational study? Chapter 10 is Curious Like Eve, Learn More. And here I do some academic deep dives. I really go into the language. I really look at just some more scholarly issues. The book has been out now for about a year. And one of the parts that has gotten the most feedback from me is this Appendix 1, Bible Basics. And in this, I answer who wrote the Bible, when did they write the Bible, where did they write the Bible, how did they write the Bible, and why did they write the Bible, in about a paragraph each. And then I summarize every book of the Bible and the Apocrypha, you're welcome Episcopalians, in one line. So key themes, key characters. Because I feel like the Bible's very complicated, and a lot of people want to get some good grips on it, but it's hard, and it's a lot. So here's just a framework for understanding the biblical text. And then the second appendix is resources for further reading. And I'd now like to just dip into a couple of the chapters and since you're here, show you some pictures that are related to the book. So this chapter, you think your family's a mess, biblical families are us. Can I ask someone to read this passage for us, please? This passage from the book of Genesis. Okay, thanks, Sheila.
Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him, and they could not speak peaceably to him. Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream that I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, and then your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf."
Good, thank you so much, Sheila. So this is the story of Joseph. You know the story of Joseph and the amazing Technicolor dream coat, right? And so he's one of the sons of Jacob or Israel, one of his 12 sons, and he is the most beloved. And the personal story that I tell related to this chapter, this passage, this story of Joseph, comes from our daughter. So I'm married, and my husband Bill and I have 2 children, a son Graham and a daughter Mari. And our daughter Mari was in college, and she was taking a literature class in which they were reading Genesis. And she called me up one day and she said, "Mom, I think Joseph had Asperger's." So some of you may know about Asperger's syndrome. Today we call it an autism spectrum disorder, being on the autism spectrum, but it's high functioning autism. And we know about this in our family because that is the diagnosis that my son, Graham, has. And I said, what do you mean? She's like, well, look, the father is really looking out for him and giving him this coat because maybe he needs some sort of boost with all the other brothers. And they can't stand him, but he has these special gifts, like he has this dream. He's got this great ability, and he sees things differently from other people. And then he tells his brothers the dream where they all bow down to him. And then, we won't read more of this story, but if you go on in the text, so this is the sheaves bow down, and next the sun and the moon and the stars bow down. It's like, stop after one dream. It's like they already hate you. Like, quibble your head. And so it looks like poor Joseph has great gifts, as people on the spectrum often do, but he struggles socially. And here is Graham when he was diagnosed, when he was 5 years old. And here he is today. He's doing great. He's 32. He actually shares an apartment with Jake, Kate and Don's son, and does a great job at JP Morgan Chase. But it was really hard, honestly, at many points, and some of you perhaps have people who have autism spectrum disorder diagnoses in your family as well, and it has its challenges. And to see something in the Bible, somebody who's a real hero in the Bible, like Joseph, and equate that with my son, was really wonderful and empowering to me, because people that we see with special needs, God clearly sees as having special abilities. Another chapter, the job of Job, actually this is a short excerpt from Job chapter 1. Job, as you know, is the paradigmatic sufferer who experiences a great deal of loss. Can I ask for someone to kindly read this passage for us? Thank you.
One day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the eldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were feeding beside them.
Sabaeans. So my rule in Bible pronunciation is say it however you like with confidence. Okay.
And the Sabaeans fell on them and carried them off, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another came and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. I alone have escaped to tell you.
Okay, thanks so much. What's your name?
Marie.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you very much. So this is the beginning, Job chapter 1, as you see. And what happens is Job experiences this slew of losses. He loses his servants, and he loses his animals, and then he loses his children, and he loses his house, and then he loses his health, and he's just there scraping himself, with a potsherd sitting on a heap of ashes. That's how the book opens. And I was teaching a seminar at Trinity Lutheran Seminary, a semester-long seminar to seminarians on the book of Job. And while I was teaching this seminar, my dad, Dave Parker, who was a United Methodist minister for 54 years, he was experiencing a slew of losses. First, my parents were robbed of their life savings by the church treasurer who posed as a financial analyst. And so they lost almost all of their life savings. So he lost money. My mother died not that long after this huge loss from a massive heart attack at 71 years old. And I think that the stress of losing all that money contributed to her heart condition. So he lost finances, he lost his wife. The house that he was living in the Poconos needed roof repairs, hired a contractor to fix the roof. The contractor ripped off the roof, walked off the job. He was living with us while the roof repairs were taking place. Water poured in, destroyed the walls, floor, ceiling, and contents of the house. So within a short period of time, while I'm teaching a class on Job, my dad has experienced all these losses. And so I just talk about the interplay between these two things, and I will share with you that my dad actually died the semester that I was teaching this class on Job in the spring of 2016. And that class, those students were wonderful to me. They ministered to me. They surrounded me with so much love. It really was a very moving experience for me as a teacher. And I think about that, all that Job experienced, but the restoration that he has in the end, and how I felt my soul was restored, and I believe by faith that my dad was restored as well when he went on to his heavenly reward. One of the things, I'm going to do a little sidebar here and just give you a brief excerpt of what I speak about in chapter 10, the academic discussion that's related to this chapter. And that is in Job 2:9. So the book of Job has 42 chapters. And in all of those 42 chapters, Job's wife speaks exactly 6 words. And I'm going to read this verse for you in Hebrew. Vatomer lo ishto, odecha mehuzek betemutecha, barech Elohim avamut. Okay. So this, if you read the New Revised Standard Version, it says, as you see here, that Job has lost everything. He's lost everything, his money, his animals, his home, his children, his health. He's sitting on these ash heaps, scraping off his sores. And his wife says to him, do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die. At least that's what we read in the English. But in the Hebrew, I'm just going to come over here and show this to you. It's Barech Elohim, Barech. Anybody here ever heard the phrase, Baruch atah Adonai? Baruch, what's Baruch mean? Blessed. Thank you. What's your name?
Rainy.
Thank you, Rainy. Thank you so much. Blessed. This word, barech, is the imperative of barach, or baruch, is to bless. What? It says curse in English. It says curse. But the Hebrew here says bless. What is going on with that? Because she only has the 6 words. And if she is telling him to curse God and die, she looks pretty awful, you know? And that's what interpreters have done, made her look really awful. And the translators have helped them. But I translate it the way it is written. You are still holding on to your integrity. So in Hebrew, there are different ways to make a question. Sometimes you put a particle at the beginning, a ha, or you use an interrogative pronoun, like who, what, where, when, why. We don't have that here. This is a statement, but our translators make it a question. It really should be read as a statement. You still are persisting in your integrity. Bless God and die. Instead of telling him just curse God and die, she says, look, you've been a good guy all along. You're going to be okay. Bless God and die. Isn't that a very different portrait of Job's wife? But this is what the translators have done. And I helped to uncover that scandal. At least I like to think so. Okay, just one more, look at 2 more chapters real briefly. Chapter 7, may I have a volunteer to read these few verses for us, please? Thank you, Lindsay.
Turn, Lord, save my life. Deliver me for the sake of your steadfast love. For in death there is no remembrance of you. In Sheol who can give you praise? I am weary with my moaning. Every night I flood my bed with tears. I drench my couch with my weeping. Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you so much. What emotion do you hear? How is the psalmist feeling? The person who says these words, how are they feeling? What would you say? No right or wrong answer, just what do you think? Okay, great sorrow. Thank you very much. Great sorrow. Bridget, thank you, Bridget. What else? Someone wants to sleep all the time. Depressed, okay, desperate, depressed. Okay. So that's a symptom of depression, right? You want to sleep all the time, or sleep the sleep of death, suicidal thoughts perhaps. This, to me, shows how the Psalms dare to be so honest with even our most difficult emotions like depression. And this is something that we also know a fair amount about in my family because my daughter Mari has bipolar disorder. And she has bipolar 2, which is much more depression, than not so much in terms of the manic phases. But what she has done is she has sought to destigmatize bipolar disorder and mental illness in general. And she has created a show called Bipolar Badass that she just performed at the Soho Playhouse last Friday evening. And has comedy routines where she's performed in New York City speaking about her bipolar disorder. In this chapter, I also share a story from my own life, one time where I felt like I was going to die because of being threatened feeling threatened by guns. And here are some pictures from that incident, but that's where the title comes from, Guns and Psalms. But I'm not going to tell you that story. You have to read the book to find out. But I am going to read a section for you now, read an excerpt that comes from chapter 8 called Song of Songs in Sing Sing. And I will share with you, I titled this chapter Song of Songs in Sing Sing just because I really liked how it sounded. And then I thought, now I got to figure out how to relate Song of Songs to Sing Sing Prison. But once I spent time with the book of Song of Songs is an incredible book. If you pick it up and read it, you might think to yourself, what on earth is this erotic love poetry doing in the Bible? I mean, it is really R-rated, but it is beautiful and gorgeous and honest and mutual and caring in terms of the relationship between this man and this man and woman. But it also has a lot of focus on the body, a lot of focus of longing, and all of those things I experienced a great deal when I was in Sing Sing Prison. I just taught there for 1 year, 2013 to 2014, but it was a very formative experience for me. I had 13 men in my class. Has anyone here seen the movie Sing Sing? It came out not that long ago. I recommend it to you if you haven't. It's a really good insider look. But I had 13 men in my class. It was a very selective program. 54 people had applied for those 13 seats. That's an admission rate like Colby College, where I had taught. So it was pretty selective. And my students were phenomenal. They did all the reading because they had time. I was the only woman in the room. I was the only white, non-Hispanic person in the room. I was nervous at first, but I came to genuinely love these men. And just as a little PS, I've had them to my home. We had a reunion dinner, and we're having another one in January to all get together again, because it was just such a wonderful, really a wonderful experience. So I'm going to read for you now an excerpt from the book. This is about almost 2 pages. It'll take about 6 minutes. And I'm going to tell you, it will tell you a little bit about my time in Sing Sing. I've just been talking about Song of Songs, and all of the luscious loving that's going on there. Song of Songs is its own realm of longing and love, but there are pockets of danger. Sing Sing is its own realm of longing and danger, but there are pockets of love. My students were kind and generous to me. During our class break, one student would bring me a cup of lousy prison coffee, doctored to taste as good as possible, which was a challenge, but helped by lots of creamer and sugar. Another would give me a snack of peanuts that he had purchased at the commissary with his own hard-earned money. Occasionally, a student would connect a Bible passage with a story from his own life that was heartbreaking. The other men would listen with care and compassion, which is a real act of love. We also joked together in that cement block classroom. I remember one day when a student, Lawrence, told me that he had been talking on the phone with his wife about our class. I told her my favorite Bible verse. He said with a sly smile. "Oh, really? Which verse is that?" I asked. "You don't want to know," he told me. And I could see where he was headed. "I really do," I insisted, smiling back at him. "It's okay. No, please, read it for us." Lawrence took his Bible, and as I had anticipated, turned to 1 Timothy 2:12. "I permit no woman to teach or have authority over a man. She is to keep silent." I paused a beat. Then, with a dramatic flick of my wrist, threw my lecture notes on the floor, strode out the door saying, "Goodbye, gentlemen." And we all burst out laughing. But my little joke points to a truth that's not so funny. Some Christians maintain that this verse from 1 Timothy should prevent me from standing in the front of any classroom. Have they never had a teacher who was a woman from whom they learned and whom they valued. They might maintain that the Bible's teachings are timeless. Do these readers rightfully expect to die if they work on the Sabbath? Exodus 31:14. Do they think parents should kill their child if that child curses at them? Leviticus 29. Do they anticipate being put to death for adultery? Deuteronomy 22:22. Likely not. Others might say that they take the Bible literally. When someone makes this claim, my quick response is to cite Mark 10:21. Jesus says to sell everything you have and give the money to the poor. And I notice you're still wearing clothes. The thoughts, stories, or verses that you or I lift from the Bible as enduring truths stem from our own biases. Most any action or behavior can be justified by the Bible, depending on where one looks and how one interprets the text. More than a book, the Bible's a library of literature written over a span of 1,000 years. The word Bible means books, plural, in Greek. Like any decent library, it contains a wide range of ideas, including contradictions. The unusual power of the Bible stems from people of faith who hold this collection as the sacred word of God. Perhaps for you, as for me, the sections where we feel God speaking depend on our interests and understanding of God. The problem arises when we take a particular passage out of the Bible to harm someone else or ourselves, to deny them or us God-given equal humanity. Invariably, the point of view lifted from its biblical context agrees with one's own opinion. It's the darndest coincidence. But the Bible is descriptive, not prescriptive. Its pages reveal the hopes and joys and challenges and anguish of people who lived thousands of years ago as they struggled to understand their relationship with God. The writers did not know that their words would last for millennia. They did not have in mind people yet unborn. You or I may believe that the Holy Spirit is behind the formation and compilation of the Bible's words, but then remember that the Holy Spirit is about the business of spreading God's grace. The Bible is not the culprit here. Those who abuse the Bible for their own controlling or damaging agendas are the ones to be challenged. When words of the Bible are used in hurtful ways, we can refuse to accept interpretations that go against the power of love that is God. Thank you, my friends. Thank you so much. We have about 15 minutes for discussion and questions. So if anyone has any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. Yes,